Counter-Narrative News brings you a special new series on CLR James. CLR James was born in Trinidad on the 1st of January 1901. An incredible life. He became one of the greatest Marxist thinkers and historians and advocates ever in revolutionary socialism and anti-colonial politics. And we are going to share, to start, his letters from London, which was originally written for the Port of Spain Gazette back in Trinidad, from which CLR James is from, and then it was published again in Signal Books in 2003. So it just so happens that on this day, back on Friday the 18th of March 1932, CLR James first arrived in England, coming via boat obviously from Trinidad. And it was just by coincidence one realized in researching CLR today that it was on this day in 1932 that he first came to England. So a very fitting day to start this new exclusive series for Counter-Narrative News. And he was invited to England by his friend Leary Constantine, who was a professional cricketer up in Nelson, Lancashire. And of course, CLR James was passionate about cricket as well, because in 1963 he publishes an amazing book called Beyond Boundaries, reflecting on colonialism through cricket. CLR James publishes his 1936 novel called Minty Alley, and it's the first novel published in England by a black person. And a couple of years later, in 1938, he publishes what many argue is a seminal work, the incredible work Black Jacobins on the Haitian Revolution. Just an extraordinary contribution, and very much a corrective in the Marxist pantheon, in terms of, up till then, really, the Haitian Revolution remains relatively just a kind of unreported and unrecognized, and CLR James fills that gap. And what a brilliant way he did that. He was asked in 1981 what his most important life work has been, and he said it was to quote-unquote clarify and extend the heritage work of Marx and Lenin, and to expand the idea of the new society, end of quote. And by new society he most likely means socialism. So we're just going to read chronologically through these letters from London. This was originally published for the Port of Spain Gazette on the 22nd of May 1932. So remember, he's only 31 years old when he arrives in England. Very confident, by the way. He's not intimidated. He's a confident, intellectual, revolutionary intellectual, coming to the so-called mother country, coming to the heart of whiteness, not at all perturbed by white society and white supremacy. Absolutely considers himself, at least equals to everyone he meets in England. So here we go. Quote, "I hadn't intended to spend so much time there. I was on my way to the Victoria and Albert Museum. But one of the men I was with, John Ince, is clever at engines and, at least to an ignoramus like myself, learned in the mysteries of mechanics. He persuaded me to go in, and I do not know why. The place had a surprising effect on me. Why haven't we got to such a place at home, or at least something like this? It is a science museum. And as soon as you go in, you are knocked silly by the sight of the airplane in which the Lieutenant Stanforth won the Schneider Trophy at a speed of 407 miles an hour. That is to say, from Port of Spain to St. Joseph in 1 minute, quicker than the thoughts of many estimable people of my acquaintance. The plane is the most beautiful thing in the museum, and one of the most beautiful things I have seen in London. It is like one of the graceful women you catch glimpses of on a morning stepping from the pavement to the Rolls-Royce or the Daimler. Nothing superfluous or cut and line, and it looks so light. You feel that for a bet you could go below it, steady it on your right hand and walk around with it, just as you give it a ride to a tiny child of which you are fond. Technical description is beyond me, despite much exposition by Ince, but the body is nothing so much as long fish, and the stays, I hope this is the correct word, look as if they would break if the machine went at 7 miles an hour, far less 407. They are about half an inch by an eighth. In fact, the whole thing looks like a toy, and it is a thing for photographers to think about, that what has been built solely for utility turns out to be so beautiful. I often used to wonder formerly what was the use of spending so much time and effort on mere speed. 200 miles an hour, 300 miles an hour, 400 miles an hour, who cares? And among the useful pieces of information printed near the exhibit is an answer to my question, which I had always secretly thought represented rather a reactionary point of view. To get more speed means such research and effort in design, engines, material, etc., that scientific knowledge goes forward. I am satisfied. May they do 1,000 miles before I die. After such a beginning, the rest was bound to be pleasing. There was the first power-driven airplane, 1903, the machine of the Wright brothers. In some of the older relics there are dummy figures showing where the pilot stood or sat or lay, and these Wrights were certainly men of genius. To me it seems that they built their plane and clean forgot, as is the way of men absorbed in their work, that they might as well think of themselves a little. In that 1903 plane there was no place for the pilot. He lay flat on his stomach on the lower wing, which meant, of course, when the plane did anything else but balance steadily, he had not only to keep her steady, but see about himself too. Maybe he was tied down. It is only when you look at the thing you realize not only the mechanical ingenuity but the enormous physical courage of the men who trust their lives in such a position to such a rickety contrivance. Rickety, because while the Schneider plane is a thing of wonder and looks as if it flew straight from the inventor's brain, the Wright plane looks like wire and canvas. Given the design, 2 or 3 good carpenters could probably turn it out in a few days. And yet the Wright plane is by far the greater performance of the two. Without it, the others had not been. Then, along the wall, the development of the airplane from 1903 to 1928, small models of every type, 1906, 1908, many between 1914 and 1918, up to 1928. On the other side, the development of the balloon and airship from 1783 to 1990, models again. Amy Johnson's plane, nothing to look at though. Then gliders, not models but originals, and some very curious indeed. One Frost, for instance, in 1902 modelled the wings of his glider, or maybe he would have called it a plane, on the wings of a bird. He succeeded admirably, and the 2 wings of the invention look exactly like the wings of some great eagle. Alas, in the notice below I read, there is no record of the machine having successfully raised itself in the air. I am smiling, but there is a tragedy here. For 20 years work had gone into the design and construction of these wings. Life can be hard. I do not intend to make a detailed inventory of all I saw. I am not competent to do so. There are models of everything, and in some cases the actual old airship or car or steam engine. 1 or 2 exhibits, however, struck me more than the rest. Miss England I was there, the boat in which Sir Henry Seagrave did 92 miles an hour, but as a spectacle it was nothing to the Schneider plane. It is a pity that Ruskin never saw that plane. He has written magnificently, if a little extravagantly, of the bow of a boat, but had he seen Miss England I and the plane side by side, I know which he would have written on. The Miss England I propeller, by the way, makes 11,000 complete revolutions in a minute. There was an old clock from Wells Cathedral which was working before the end of the 14th century. In the middle of the last century, new works were installed and the clock was removed to the museum, where it ticks serenely on, striking the quarters and the hours and keeping much better time than the brand new watch which I had bought 2 weeks ago, and which, so the Hopsman says, but I don't believe him, is going badly because it is subject to climatic conditions. I had a good look at the old clock, rather a dull existence ticking away, with a little recurrent excitement every quarter of an hour, but I couldn't help remembering with envy that in a few years I would probably be gone, while the old beast would probably be there in 1,000 years, ticking away, living his narrow but peaceable life. Models, models, models everywhere, including a model of the Bermuda dock in 1868. And the model of the dock as it is today, which I noted with great approval for Bermuda, is not exactly the West Indies, but the English people don't know that, and a little deception in a good cause need involve no lengthy arguments as to the end justifying the means. Many of these models work by compressed air. Press a button and they start immediately. And of course the children have a glorious time. They walk from case to case pressing buttons, and the fresh faces and the bright eyes glow as the wheels start to spin. I had to press myself. Chose a large case with 15 wheels and things, a model of I know not what. I chose it because it was large. Pressed the button rather gingerly, and by Jove, everything started to move. I felt like an inventor. Now, as I said at the start, why couldn't we have some models at home? An attendant told me that some of them, though not many, are made on the premises by the museum staff, while a good many are sent by private firms. We can't afford galleries of beautiful pictures, statues and works of art, though we could have reproductions and plaster casts as in Canada, but we certainly could have a small museum of models of the type which predominate in this science museum. And one reason why this struck me so forcibly is because of a boy I saw there. Most of the other children, and at least one grown-up, were sightseeing and pressing buttons for the fun of the thing. But there was this boy, a boy of about 14, thin, with a thin, keen, rather handsome face, leaning over Miss England I, examining the dials and steering gear. Sir Henry Seagrave never looked at them with more concentration. So you could almost see the boy's mind growing, so Galileo must have looked at the pendulum, noting how evenly it swung, or the Newton at the apple, wondering why it fell. Museums, galleries, etc. are for the general public, it's true. What the general public learns there is a debatable point. But the 1 in 1,000 boy is a justification for all expenditure. He sees and sees and sees all that has ever been done, and then, if he has the right stuff in him, his mind moves forwards, maybe only a little way, but still a little way. Henry Ford knows this very well. He is devoting a fortune to making a museum in America where there will be models of everything from the beginning of time, Adam's spade, Noah's ship, etc., etc., down to the latest of everything. We in Trinidad know what the answer to any such effort, if it is ever made, will be. No money, and probably a hint of that. Oh, the people will not be interested. The people this and the people that. But all this talk about the people, I have been to the National Gallery twice. Free lectures are provided daily. A lecturer goes around discoursing on points in the pictures, the history, etc. The first day I went there were about 20 people. The second day, not so many. The heart of London, mind you, 8 million people after centuries of civilization. Let any idle mathematician work out what fraction of a person would represent the Trinidadian corresponding proportionately to the 20 whom I saw representing the 8 million. When you move around this place and see the opportunities the people have, the way everything is put in their way and kept ready for whomever may want it, and then stop and think for a minute of the conditions in the West Indies, Trinidad and poor Barbados, the wonder is not that the Creoles do so little, but they do so well. All that any middle-class Englishman needs a little ambition. If he has that, the way to achievement and success is wide open. Of course, the competition is keen, but there is competition everywhere. The fact remains that a man in his country can make himself a highly cultural person by merely providing himself with a thick pair of boots to walk from place to place. Free. 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 Everything free. Some people say that there has never been a Beethoven player like Arthur Schnabel. You may, if you like, pay 21 shillings to hear him, but either the government or the London County Council provides free concerts, and Schnabel has played at one of these. They don't run down the people here. They provide the best and then beg them to come back and take advantage of it. And when they don't come, they hold meetings and rack their brains to try and encourage them. But as I said, my aim that morning was not the Science Museum. I went finally to the Victoria and Albert Museum. Pictures, books, statues, tapestry, woodwork, everything. I went there, so to speak, on business. I wanted a book. The bookseller could not recommend one of the type I wanted, but he told me to go to the Victoria and Albert Museum, where there is a splendid library of books on art, the best in England. There I could see the books they had and decide which one I wanted. Admirable. The librarian showed me 30 catalogues, each 18 inches long, 12 inches wide and 3 inches thick, but alphabetical order is alphabetical order in 1 volume or 50. I chose my books, wrote them on a card, and was shown to a seat. In 2 minutes appears a man with the volumes in his hand. In 5 minutes I decide on the one I want, and the whole thing is over. A wonderful country this. So I decide to look around. Room after room, first editions of Shakespeare, Japanese bronzes, sketches by Picasso. I am hungry and have lunch on the premises. Round and round again. And being hungry again, have tea, and go round and round again and lose myself. do I meet more attendants than visitors, and by great fortune come down some steps and find myself near to the same door that I went in. So I take that as a hint from Providence and decide that I have had enough for one day and must go home. And then comes the thrill of the day. For walking out, I cast my eye to the left and see a Rodin statue, for which I have read about in Orpen's Outline of Art. John the Baptist, Rodin called it, but it was no more John the Baptist than I am John the Baptist. It is a statue of a naked man walking. That's all, neither more nor less. And Rodin was persuaded to call it John the Baptist. But all of that is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the statue. In the basement of the British Museum are plaster casts of the Apollo Belvedere and the Venus de Milo. But on the Day of Judgment, the 20th century will be able to look to the old Greeks in the eye and say, we admit that yours are the best, but, and then produce the Rodin. No one who sees it can pass it by. That is one thing with the plastic arts. You need some training in literature and more in music, but any fool who will take the trouble to look can see a picture or a statue. I was dreadfully tired out, but the thing made me fresh again. Ours is not only age of scientific enterprise and multitudinous organization. In 1 year they sent 1 million fighters forth, south and north, and they built their gods of brazen pillar high as the sky, yet reserved 1,000 chariots in full force, gold of course. O heart! O blood that freezes, blood that burns! Browning was speaking of a girl, but there are other things than girls that make the blood burn. The Rodin statue is one of them. I sat and watched it, and the body is still, the mind moves. I reflected that the Greek who lived 2,000 years ago could have sat with me and watched. He could have seen it with much the same eyes and feelings that I did, but the Schneider plane would have been meaningless to him. 3,000 years from now, some wanderer from the West Indies will walk down Exhibition Road. He will go into the Science Museum and see the latest thought plane. That vanished type of conveyance, aircraft, will be represented by models. Will he see Lieutenant Stanforth's plane? Only as one of a crowd of obsolete designs. But in the art museum he will see the statue of the man walking. It will be to him as it is to me. It cannot grow old. It cannot go out of date. It is timeless, made materially of bronze, but actually, as has been said of great literature, the precious lifeblood of a master spirit. That is why I shall sometimes visit the Museum of Science. It will always be on my way to the Museum of Art. End of quote. Yeah, really interesting piece there. You can see again the confidence which he exudes as being a quote-unquote colonized person coming from the periphery to the center. His rather interesting and slightly reflective, sarcastic remarks about the different ways society is organized in the colonial center and the relative poverty to which is forced upon the people in the colonies, reflecting off the infrastructure of the arts and the history of knowledge in these institutions, such as the National Gallery, the Science Museum, and the Victoria and Albert Museum. By the way, those who have not visited these museums or this area, these two buildings are nearly immediately next to each other on Exhibition Road in Kensington in southwest London. So we will come once again and continue the series on these letters from London from CLR James, and after that we will go into more of his other works and his theoretical and historical contributions. Long live CLR James!